Hello, and thank you for joining me. Since the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States, I've been getting more and more frightened. Not of President Trump, frightened of his opponents. Now, please don't get me wrong. Some of the aspects of President Trump certainly alarm me. His character, his apparent volatility, his inconsistencies, the question of truthfulness, and his language and attitudes are sometimes very crude and vulgar. But the point I'm making is that the reaction he's provoked is utterly disproportionate. It involves a wholesale loss of reason, bordering on mass hysteria. The frightening thing is not just that his opponents aren't prepared to give the man a chance to see what he actually does before making a judgment on him. It's more that he's been turned into a kind of absolute monster, and on the basis of remarks he's made, most of which have been grossly distorted or wrenched out of context. Worse still, his opponents are utterly impervious to any evidence which might contradict their view of him as without any redeeming features whatsoever. And that's because they know for a certainty, you see, that he's utterly bad, utterly beyond the pale of human decency altogether. What is human decency? Well, it's what they decide it to be. And so it follows that anyone who questions this view is him or herself beyond the pale too. So anything that person might say in defence of Donald Trump means that that person is by definition to be disregarded. Now, that's the way the left deals with all dissent. It's an approach which is redolent of fundamentalist religious hysteria, the heresy trials of the Middle Ages or the Salem witch hunt. It's the hallmark of all movements of fanatical believers, religious or secular. It's totalitarian, and above all, it incites hatred, paranoia, and aggression. These are, of course, the very things that President Trump is himself accused of. Well, that's another feature of totalitarian movements, to project onto others the bad stuff that you yourself are engaged in doing. Consider, President Trump is accused of promoting hatred. Really? In his inaugural speech, he actually said, "The Bible tells us how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." Now, look at his opponents. It's those people who are spitting hatred. Hatred of President Trump, with calls for him to die, to be assassinated, or to commit suicide, and also by implication, if not openly, hatred of those who voted for him. His opponents accuse him of being a Nazi or a fascist. Here was the pop star Madonna, who accused him of tyranny. The same Madonna who admitted she had thought a lot about blowing up the White House. Well, Madonna may be just a silly star whose opinions are worth nothing, but such language from such an icon potentially incites hatred and violence. After all, if someone really is a tyrant or a Nazi, it's legitimate to take them down, isn't it? That's how the thinking would go. What's even more alarming, though, is the ignorance among such people of what tyranny and fascism and Nazism actually are. These Trump bashers, you see, seem to think that appealing to the people directly, as President Trump does, is fascist. They think mass enthusiasm by the people is fascist. They think any view opposed to their own is fascist. They totally ignore what fascism actually is, a dictatorship based on the denial of democracy and the violent subjugation of the people in the pursuit of power. These anti-Trumpers, moreover, are engaged in what might be called fascism denial, trivialising the mass murder and real tyranny that fascism actually involves. They unforgivably confuse it with patriotism, which President Trump's apparent deep love of his country actually is. This doesn't just assassinate his character, but it also smears the millions of decent people who voted for him with the same sentiments. Now, this distinction would cut no ice with the anti-Trumpers, because for them it's the people themselves who the left actually fear and despise. And if anyone really does incite violence in the pursuit of unbridled power, it's surely some of these anti-Trumpers themselves. That's why Rabbi Marvin Hier, the dean and founder of the Nazi hunting Simon Wiesenthal Center, who blessed President Trump at his inauguration, was himself immediately targeted by hundreds of racist and anti-Semitic messages, including Nazi imagery, from viewers who are watching the inaugural ceremonies online. These messages, some of them from social media accounts which were prominently affiliated with white supremacist movements, contained calls to light the Jew on fire, the Jews put a spell on us, or they referred to Hitler and gas chambers. And although thousands demonstrated peacefully enough against the new president, those protests were also marked by significant thuggery, with more than 200 rioters arrested. The police said that these rioters came armed with hammers and crowbars and smashed the windows of banks and restaurants, dragging trash cans and newspaper boxes into the middle of the street, setting refuse on fire, even a limousine. And why? Because they disagreed with the new choice of president on the grounds that he was a fascist. Well, as violent and as intolerant as their behaviour is, ultimately, it's all about making a statement about themselves. They create a fascist monster in order to define themselves in opposition to him as noble and virtuous. Whether or not the new president turns out to be good or bad, his opponent's behaviour only tells us about themselves, and none of it is good. The more they behave like this, moreover, the bigger the hole they dig for themselves, and the more clearly we can see just why Donald Trump was elected. Back in the 1950s, the writer J.L. Talmon coined the term cultural totalitarianism to describe the attempt to change our behaviour by taking over our minds. What we're seeing on the streets of America, as well as in its media in the wake of the election of Donald Trump, is a development from that into what I would call totalitarian narcissism. Well, that's it for today. If you would like to follow my work, please visit my website, melodyphillips.com, where you can sign up for my weekly updates. Meanwhile, goodbye for now.